Well, hello, I guess I am back, and welcome to Recipe for Disaster. Recipe for Disaster is a great combination of the customization options you get from games like The Sims in a much more specific, I'm gonna say it, niche environment. Recipe for Disaster is a great example of an indie game that actually understands it's not going to be the next massive open world multi-billion-dollar game, so it has a core vision and it sticks to it brilliantly. Some of the gameplay elements include a nice but not too inventive personality trait system of preference-based work and refusal to do certain tasks. One of the issues I do have with this system is sometimes you'll come across a worker who skill-wise is perfect for the job you're doing, but refuses to do it. Now, in the sort of the 1, 2, and 3, which is kind of the average system, I can understand that makes sense. You might be naturally a little bit better at something, but when you get to the sort of the tier 4 and tier 5, and actually even the tier 3 maybe, I think the tier 3 is kind of pushing it a little bit, but if you've got tier 4 and something, I just don't see you're going to refuse to do that when you've got tier 1 and everything else, because that doesn't make sense. Like, you wouldn't do that. As with many other systems of Recipe for Disaster, though, there is a consistency with other mechanics. So when you go to assign people to a certain job, you'll see a screen that clearly shows A, the ranking of people, and B, if they're going to refuse to do the job you're trying to assign. It really does make life easy on that front. However, there's always a little bit of a drawback. It's very hard to distinguish the employees themselves by portrait alone. So you do need that system in there to know who it is you're trying to assign. It's a small complaint. The recipe generation system is rich and detailed, allowing for some truly custom creations. You can really make complex dishes with effectively unlimited ingredients, though whether or not every dish will be a success, that's another question entirely, as various ingredients will be tagged as not pleasant to eat raw. An issue with this system is there are some foods that, while not commonly eaten raw, can in the right dish be served raw. Another issue I've found is that for whatever reason while I was playing, pasta just didn't seem to exist. I had literally 2 dishes called, one of them was called pasta bake and involved sort of pasta shells, and the other one was using pasta sheets. And one of my biggest complaints from customers is that I didn't serve food they liked when the only food they liked was pasta. So it's quite a big issue, I'd actually say, with your game about making food if the food's not tagged properly. But for all I know, that's a bug that may well be ironed out as small hotfixes come along. I doubt that's too big an issue to fix. One feature I would like to see added is a button to add X amount of ingredients to your order straight from the recipe screen. So when you're building the recipe, you'll see tags saying, oh, you don't have this. I'd like to be able to just manually click and order that food straight away without having to click out of the recipe screen, click into the order screen, and then click all the buttons, because it does segregate them on there, so it's not like it's trying to make you remember which things you need and manage it that way. The use of the global ordering system will save you a lot of time with this. I routinely have 7 of everything just in stock because I don't seem to ever go through too much of that in a day. However, I might start looking into that because I did find that I was becoming less profitable in some days, and I think it's because I was running out of ingredients for some of my more popular dishes. Recipe for Disaster is a wonderful mix of restaurant management, making sure that you're keeping an eye on the front of house staff and making sure people are getting served and seated at tables, and optimizing the amount of tables you can fit in your area whilst keeping the decor nice and not too cluttered, and making sure that your back of house, your chefs and all of that sort of stuff, are being maintained well, keeping enough that they can make the food quickly, but not so many that food is being made poorly or the staff are getting under each other's feet, which can be a real problem and can severely impact on their ability to perform. Another key focus you'll be having while you're managing your restaurant is making sure the mental health of your workers is remaining high, as otherwise you will lead to breakdowns or potentially even worse, refusal to work and just going home, and of course quitting can also happen if you don't make sure your staff are well looked after. Customers will have a kind of set time where they want to be served by, and if you don't do it quick enough, they will be walking out, which will again have another cascading effect, affecting the mental health of your workers, meaning some of them might not want to work, which means that you're serving people slower, and it's a beautiful, chaotic mess trying to get that all sorted out if you start going down that way. Another feature they've implemented is the feature of the health inspection, which can have both wonderful and disastrous effects on your restaurant. So you've got to keep that in mind, as the last time I had a health inspection on my restaurant, it gave us 10 percentage points worth of popularity, which was a lot towards completing the goal for that scenario. When it comes to visuals and graphics, Recipe for Disaster is using a very standard art style that I have seen in quite a few indie games recently. For the King immediately springs to mind when looking at the loading screen. So it's not winning any awards for the most inventive graphics, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Personally, I'm not against the idea of using pre-made graphical packs, which I'm guessing is what they've done here because it looks so similar to some of the other stuff I've seen previously, as long as it's used in a way that creates a coherent graphical styling. Here, Recipe for Disaster succeeds as thematically everything works. Nothing feels like it belongs in another game. Visually, the UI is very effective at keeping me informed of what's going on. It does feel a little cluttered from time to time, but I've very rarely found myself unaware of something happening in my restaurant due to the UI. One of my bigger issues with the visuals of the game are the limited numbers of pictures I can add to my dishes. As for a restaurant game, I feel like variety really is needed in a way that it isn't in other games. The same can be said for employees, as I kind of alluded to earlier, as it's very hard to distinguish between employees through their character portraits. The graphical styling in this point doesn't necessarily help because it's quite a homogeneous design for people, so there's not a lot of room to make them look different. But it is just a comment that I think is worth making. Audio is perfectly serviceable, if a little repetitive, while certainly not groundbreaking. Again, there is a charming little soundtrack, which is perfectly listenable as background sound, but I wouldn't blame you for cranking up a podcast, or maybe even some of your own music while you play. It certainly wouldn't distract from the experience to do this. Audio feedback when completing tasks is satisfying, and along with the visuals helps you understand when both good and bad things are happening within your restaurant. The story for Recipe for Disaster is an interesting one because it does have a campaign mode, which is very good at teaching you the base mechanics of the game and getting you used to running your restaurant, but it doesn't really need to do an awful lot more than say, here's a restaurant, make it successful. The campaign is all about bringing up failing restaurants to a successful standard. I did find that in the early parts of the campaign, at least, the campaign's very easy. Once you've gotten past the first hurdle of actually building up the restaurant for a couple of days, you should be able to pretty much print money, and you won't have too many issues with any of the tasks. One, I guess it's more of a gameplay mechanic, but it's one that appeared in the story, is the mechanic of bankruptcy, which I think's a little bit, could do with a bit of tweaking. I was playing through one of the campaign levels and decided to do a big renovation project at the end of the day. It did run me into the red, so I was about minus $100, and I was technically had made, I think, minus 20 in that last hour, and that's an instant failure, which I don't think makes a lot of sense because there's very few restaurants that will go out of business in one day because they've made a large renovation project. I'd like to see either a loan system in the game so you can make those bigger projects without technically going into the red, or just another, like a different system for how bankruptcy is implemented so that it can't just be that you chose to build the same thing you could have built 5 minutes later when it was the start of the new day at the end of the previous day and it wasn't fine. Now that's just the campaign. Another mode that wasn't in there when I originally was looking at this game, and it's why this review's taken so long to come out, because I didn't want to release this review before this feature was in the game, because I knew, well, I didn't know, but I had assumed it was coming, is a sandbox mode. And a sandbox mode for a game like this is exactly what you want. You don't want to have really strict rules that then mean that you, it doesn't mean that you, it means you don't have strict rules that instantly complete the level and then you end up starting a whole new restaurant 4 seconds later. It means you get a little bit more time to breathe and actually try and test new things out and test out the game mechanics a little bit more coherently. It's definitely needed for a game like this that's kind of going on that same Sims niche of, you know, build what you want and run things how you like. Performance was a bit of a mixed bag for me. I think that might be because of my system, so your mileage may very much vary here. As a rule, I run games with VSync enabled because I don't see any reason to stress my GPU any more than I need to. So I'm running a 1440p 165Hz panel with a 3080. Running that, I have very, very few issues in games anymore since that upgrade. But interestingly enough, Recipe for Disaster's default VSync options limits the game to 60 FPS, which is not what VSync's meant to do. VSync's meant to limit it to your vertical, it's vertical sync. It's meant to limit it to the refresh rate of the display, which in my case is 165. So I'm hoping this is going to be a fairly easy fix that they can actually implement VSync properly. The issue I had is that with VSync on, I was limited to 60. With VSync off, I was limited to massive screen tearing, which is not really very pleasant when I'm playing a game like that. So I ended up electing to play with VSync on at 60, and it looked fine. There weren't any issues too much with that one, but I am hoping it's an easy fix for the developers and they can implement that fix fairly quickly because it's just kind of annoying. Worth the price. So this is where I kind of justify. Now the price is, it's a difficult one, because ordinarily when I play games and I start talking about price, I have usually got a wide range of experience playing other games or knowing titles that do the same thing or a similar thing that I can compare it to. But Recipe for Disaster really does sort of fill a niche that I've not really seen a lot of stuff doing before. Now, there are other restaurant management sim games out there, but you don't really see them too often, so it's quite hard for me to justify whether the £15 asking price is totally reasonable for everyone. What I would say is if after seeing this and hearing what you've heard about this, you think you fit the niche of people who would enjoy this game, I totally think it's worth the £15. You will easily, and this is how I tend to rationalize prices for things, I rationalize how many hours of enjoyment I get out of it versus how many hours I'd have to work for it. So, assuming people on like minimum wage are on about £7 or £8 an hour, could be more, could be less, this is sort of between 2 or 3 hours worth of work. Now, I've easily gotten 2 or 3 hours worth of enjoyment out of this game, and I think you probably can too, assuming it's in your niche. If it's not a game you'd really usually pick up, I'd say just hold fire a little bit, wait for more content to come out, watch a few more reviews, look at the gameplay and think whether it's really something for you, or potentially wait for a sale, because you don't want to be disappointed. My final review score, it's got to be a solid 8 out of 10. So by no means perfect for all people. So if you fit the niche that Recipe for Disaster is targeted at, I think you're really going to enjoy your ride. And I would say definitely, at the very least, keep it as one to watch. Thanks for watching. I hope you've had a wonderful time and you consider dropping that like button, a follow or subscribe, or whatever it's called on YouTube now. And come join me on Twitch. I should be being a little bit more active on there over the coming months as I transition back as to being a university student rather than a full-time worker, so I'll have hopefully a little bit more free time on my hands. But it's been lovely talking to you again. I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.